All right, this week we're still in Joshua 2. We're looking at the life of Rahab. And one of the things that really has been sticking with me as I've been reading through this story, considering Rahab, considering all of the Bible. You know, even looking back to Hebrews, and we were talking, 2 weeks ago in Hebrews 11, we see all these people, the examples of their life. And all of their lives were tough, right? They all went through stuff. Right, and something that you see here in Rahab and all of that is just that your past has a purpose. Your life has a purpose. Nothing is without meaning. Right? Nothing was an accident, something that just slipped by. God missed this. This happened to this person. Right? And so, looking at that, man, I think we can all look back in our lives and see that we all have a past. We all have junk. Right? Or either junk that we've done, or stuff that's happened to us, that has been hard, that has been hurtful, that pain in our lives, right? And it's hard because we want to try to figure out why, right? Or we just want to run from it. But I think that as we look in Scripture, we see that there's meaning in all of it. We might not always know what that meaning is going to be. In our lifetime, that meaning might not be revealed, right? But there is meaning. And we can look back, at least here, and see the examples of the meaningfulness of the lives of these people, right? And we can even look back in church history and see the meaningfulness of people's lives, things that happened, and that person might not even have seen the fruit of that which God was working on in their time. But we can look back, and it can be evidence for us, right? So as we're struggling, right, as we're going through this life, we can do that knowing that God is in control. God didn't miss it. God's not aloof. It's not that He doesn't care, right? And that there will ultimately be some kind of purpose from this, right? And that helps us to keep fighting and struggling, right? I'm going to keep going on with this, and I'm going to keep fighting because God calls me to persevere, and God says that there's meaningfulness in life, right? And my hope is not that my circumstances will be changed. My hope is that I'll have a relationship with God. My hope is that there's meaning, right? My hope is that I'll find fulfillment in relationship with God. So I remember growing up in the church and having a lot of knowledge of the Bible, knowing a lot of the Bible, understanding a lot of the stories, not really having a good context of the whole biblical story, right? And thinking I got it. I understand it, right? But though I understood it and I claimed relationship with God, I would still go and mess up and delve into things that I knew that I shouldn't be doing, right? And so even looking back, I'm like, man, I didn't get it then, right? I was still messing up and doing things. I'm still delving into drugs here. I'm still messing around with girlfriends here and doing things that I shouldn't be doing. I'm still lying and cheating here, right? And all of that mess, right? And I just thought I'm not that bad. I haven't killed anybody. I don't have that great testimony because I'm not that bad, right? And that was ignorance on my part because I'm thinking that Rahab the prostitute, I wasn't a prostitute, But it's interesting looking at stories like this to see that, man, how lucky Rahab was to be understanding and to understand her position, right, and be humble. Sometimes for us, it's easy for us to get caught up in our pride of being in the church, growing up in the church and thinking that we got it and that we're good, right? So my kids, your dad being a pastor doesn't save you, right? Truly knowing who God is, having a relationship with God, that's what saves you, right? We could have a kind of morally kind of vague life where we're not doing things that are overly bad, but we still, unless we have a relationship with God, we are not saved, right? And we're still just in need of salvation as Rahab was, right? So let's jump into the story, and let's look at talking about how your past has a purpose, right? And even not just your past, right, but your struggles. And we're going to see this in the text here. So last week we read through the whole chapter. This week we're really looking in at 2:9 through 11. Here it says, I know that the Lord, and this is Rahab speaking. She goes up to the spies after already betraying her own country, lying and saying that they ran out. Meanwhile, she hid them in the flax on her roof. So she goes up to them after lying to her king, and she says, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and everyone who lives in the land is panicking because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two Amorite kings you completely destroyed across the Jordan. When we heard this, we lost heart, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth below." And so she's proclaiming faith here. She has belief that, like, I'm on the wrong side, right? My side's going to lose. And she's already acted on that. She's lied to save these guys because she's like, I am on the wrong side. That's the side that I want to be on. Yahweh, he's the true one, right? And she claims that in the end. Right? So she has this belief, and then it's based on evidence. Right? So he says there that she sees evidence of what God has done miraculously on behalf of Israel. Right? He brought them out of Egypt, and he dried up the Red Sea. Nothing that they did, something that he did. Right? And she sees evidence of things God did through them in defeating Sihon and Og, these two kings. And we're going to talk about this a little bit. Right? So she sees these two evidences, stuff that God's done on their behalf and stuff that God's done through them. And the result of that is that all the people in the land are fearful of them. They're like, they're coming. What is he going to do to us? Right? What miraculous things might God do on behalf of them or even through them as they come in against us? And so she's like, I want to be on your side. And then the result of her belief based on this evidence is God's glory. Right? She claims that the Yahweh, their God, is God in heaven above and on earth below. He is the one true God. Right? So the result of this, and the result of their past, of their struggles, the fact that they were enslaved in Egypt and then freed from Egypt and brought out of Egypt miraculously, the result of that was them hearing about this, her coming to faith, and God being glorified. So before we go further, I just want to kind of parallel this. Again, we've looked at this verse multiple times now over the last couple months, I think. Romans 8:28. We know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. Right? All things. Not just the easy things, not just the glamorous things, not just the good things. Man, their enslavement for 400 years in Egypt was part of those all things. Their past struggles, right? They're then being delivered as they went through the Red Sea. By the way, we're going to go back in the text, but it would have taken like a week to go from Egypt to Canaan and just march right into this land that he's promised them. But he said, they're not ready. So let's go this other way. Let's detour. Right? And so then they go across the Red Sea, and then they spend all this time in the wilderness. And then their own sin results in them spending even longer in wilderness. Right? But all of those things end up being for the good of those who are called according to God. Rahab was called as well. Right? If all this wouldn't have happened, Rahab wouldn't have heard these things. Right? And if Rahab wouldn't have heard these things, these spies might have been killed by that king. Right? Because she'd been like, oh yeah, they're right here, get them. Take them. Right? So they were delivered because of the past, because of their family's past, because of what the past people who lived before them had gone through, right? And the fact that this had been shared, and Rahab was delivered, and her whole family was delivered as a result of all this, as a result of these hardships. And it was, when we say it was hard, man, they were enslaved. There's even a point before, at the time of Moses, that they're like, there's too many of them. Let's kill all their baby boys. Right? Like, nasty, terrible, hard things. Moses goes back into delivering them to tell them about how God is coming and he wants to free them. And they make they're even more oppressed. The work gets harder. They're beaten more. Right? Harsh, hard reality. And it had a purpose, though. But even these people that had lived under that, they didn't get to see Canaan. They didn't get to see the promised land. Right? We're talking, it was a generation difference here. So we don't always get to see what God is doing. Someone else might get to enjoy the benefits of it, of our struggles. But if we have a relationship with God, we get to see God when we die. We're going to get to enjoy the ultimate hope, the ultimate joy there, right? But it all has a purpose. So going back, this starts before we even get into the belief. We look at how God sets this all up. right? And so we do see this theme of God's sovereignty throughout this text today, right? And we talked about this. It was in the music. It was in what Kate said. We see how God is working through all things, right? He's planning this all. And so if you go back to Genesis 15, there we go. In Genesis 15, so in Genesis 12, God had called Abraham, and he said, I'm going to make you into a great nation. Hey, you, idol worshiper, come follow me. You whose wife is barren and you're old, I'm going to make you into a great nation. He's speaking miraculous things into Abram, and he's like, all right, and he believes and he follows, right? And then in 15, he gets more specific, and he makes this covenant with him, right? And so here he says, the Lord said to Abram, know this for certain, your offspring will be resident aliens for 400 years in a land that does not belong to them, and will be enslaved and oppressed. So he's promising him that he's going to have many people. He's promising he's going to make him into a nation. But he's even saying, man, 4 generations down, he doesn't say that specifically, but we see that, right? Your lineage is going to be enslaved in Egypt. So it's not an accident that they end up enslaved in Egypt. God calls us that ahead of time. God has the plan that they will be enslaved. However, I will judge the nation they serve, and afterward they will go out with many possessions. Right? So they're going to be enslaved, but I'm going to judge the nation that enslaves them. There will be justice here. And they're going to come out with many possessions. The result of their enslavement is actually going to be that they're going to come out doing well. They're going to prosper. But you will go to your fathers in peace and be buried at a good old age. So he's like, you're not going to have to go through this struggle. Man, Abram, you've had your own struggles. Right? And the 4th generation, they'll return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites has not yet reached its measure. So here in this text, we just see that, man, God set this up. God planned this. God planned some harsh, hard times in their future before these guys were even born, ultimately for his glory. And then we also see, that's the setup, right? So God has planned this. Then they go. Joseph actually goes down to Egypt, right? Because they're in famine. His brothers sell him into slavery, try to kill him, decide I will profit off of him instead. He goes down there. He prospers in this land, even though that he's enslaved and being hurt. And then he ends up ultimately saving his family, right? It ends up being him put into a position where he can save his family because of the famine, right? And that's how they get down there. And then they live there, and then after a while, they're doing too well. And the Egyptians get jealous of them, and so they enslave them. They forget about the goodness of Joseph, right? They're enslaved, and then that's where Moses brings them out. And then they go through all this time of going through the Red Sea, going through the wilderness. They're finally here, and they come into the land, right? And then this is this time where they're now talking to Rahab. They're getting ready to fight against Jericho, right? So the result then is this what I was talking about earlier, the fact that Rahab has belief, right? And her belief drives her to action, right? She doesn't just know, all right, these guys, God, their God is the one true God. These guys keep having victory, right? She knows it and she acts on it, right? So it's not enough, kind of like me growing up. It's not enough for me to know all the right Bible answers. Jesus, right? It's not enough for me to know all the heroes of the Bible. It wouldn't even be enough for me to memorize it all and have all the head knowledge right and succinct, be able to spit it out in context. It has to change how I live, right? It does me no good to know the Word and not live the Word. And it does no one else any good either. If I know all this, but I don't share it with anyone, then they can't receive salvation if they haven't heard it, right? And I'm not actually living out and obeying this Word if I'm not taking action on it, right? So if Israel just camped out in the desert and didn't follow God and didn't go into this new land and go to battle, they wouldn't have received God's promises themselves, right? And if they didn't obey and follow him, right, Rahab wouldn't have been saved either. And these other people wouldn't have been saved. Right? So her belief is more than just belief. She's acting on it. And her belief is a result of other people acting on their belief. You feel me? Cool. All right. And so that belief, though, is based off evidence. Right? So she's not just blindly acting. Right? It's not taking a shot in the dark. Oh, here's some other people. Cool. All right, well, let's try this God out. Let's see if that works. Right? They have some new knowledge. Okay. Right? No, her belief is rooted on evidence. Rooted on evidence of things they've heard. And it's not just like a one-time occurrence. Right? It's not like, oh, these guys won this battle, so let's follow them. Right? Oh, I heard there's this miraculous thing. Someone got healed or something over here. Okay, let's try it out. Right? Her belief is based off of evidence that's happened over time. Right? So it starts with this whole idea of them being led out of Egypt and going through the Red Sea. And that had happened over 40 years before this. Right? They had been enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. And on top of that, on top of those miraculous things, it was based off of seeing them have victory in battle against these other guys, Sihon and Og, these other nations that were just across the river from Jericho. So it's not like Christianity is not just, all right, just act in faith, blindly obey this, follow this, it's good. There's actual evidence. It's not even just a book, right? We can look back and we can see evidence in this world, archaeological digs, right? In fact, there's textual evidence that the Bible is true. There's more manuscripts of the Bible than there are of any other book, right? A good movie to watch is The Case for Christ. It goes through all this evidence that there is just for the resurrection, right? And so it's not a blind thing that we just say, all right, let's follow God. Why not, right? Maybe it'll work. Shoot, if I believe this, there's a good chance I get to go to heaven. If I'm wrong, I'm going wherever I was going anyways, right? There's evidence over time. People have been eyewitnesses to these things, right? And so that's what she's heard evidence that was based off of eyewitness testimony, right? And just like that, us in our place of redemptive history, we can look back and with so much more evidence, right? Not just of what happened here, but what happened as a result of her acting and all these other people throughout time. Right? So her belief is based in evidence. And so, not only had they been rescued out of Egypt, but there's this detour. That, again, God's sovereignly working. Right? So in Exodus 13, 17 through 18, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them along the road to the land of the Philistines, even though it was nearby. This would have been the easy way. How often do we want the easy way? Man, God, if you just fix this situation, right? Yeah, just give Mom an apartment, and life would be so much easier, right? Just, man, Lord, just give me enough money to pay off these certain things, and we'll be out of debt. Give it to me now, right? Like the quick fix. Come on, God, that would be so much easier. But there's something about the struggle that's good for us, and that's good for others. Other people seeing how we struggle through this, right, is proof of God working. So he takes them on a detour on purpose. For God said the people will change their minds and return to Egypt if they face war. Right? They're not ready to just march in and go to war. They need a detour. So he led the people around toward the Red Sea along the road of the wilderness. And the result is Pharaoh, the Egyptians are sitting and watching, and they're like, what's up with these people? Because they totally went the wrong way, right? And they look crazy and stupid. But there's purpose in it, right? If they had just went up, then the whole Red Sea thing wouldn't have happened, right? So that takes away this huge miraculous act that God did on their behalf, right? That's the one thing that she names. She's like, I know how God led you out of Egypt and marched you across the Red Sea on dry land. If God hadn't detoured them, if they hadn't taken the long way and struggled, right, then God couldn't have done this miraculous thing for them. The Red Sea wasn't just an obstacle, it was an opportunity for God to reveal his glory and his power. And God used that to defeat the Egyptians. Right? So if they had just marched straight up, the Egyptians were still back there. Right? Maybe Pharaoh changes his mind, decides to go back and attack them. He could. God purposely encamps them next to the Red Sea. He hardens Pharaoh's heart, it tells us in the text. Right? So Pharaoh and his armies, they go after them. And then God leads them through. The Egyptians go into the sea too on dry land, and then God brings the water in and takes them out. So he uses their detour also to fight for them. They didn't have to fight for themselves. He already told us they weren't ready to fight for themselves. So God miraculously took out their enemies for them. And the result of that is that other people feared them. Oh man, their God, like they didn't even have to pick up, all Moses had to do was pick up a staff. Right? They didn't even have to go into war. He fought for them. And then in 14:4, exactly, if you want to go back and read this. So 13, 17 through 18 tells you about that detour. And in 14:4, you see that he says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will pursue them. Then I will receive glory by means of Pharaoh and all his army. And the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So even defeating the Egyptians there, by hardening Pharaoh's heart, having him pursue them, and then be defeated, brings God's glory too. Right? And so there's that detour, and then there's that salvation. Right? In 15 of Exodus, you see the story of how God frees them from them. And so our detours can often lead to our salvation. Right? Maybe you had to struggle through this relationship so that God could save you from it. Right? Maybe you had to struggle through this obstacle so that God could change your heart and give you more sympathy and give you his heart. Right? Maybe you had to struggle financially so that later when God blessed you, you'd be a better steward of that which he gave you. Or maybe you will always struggle financially so that you can cling to God and know that he is your provider and he will care for you. It all has purpose and it all has meaning. For Rahab, all of that led to her salvation. Right? For these guys too, encountering Rahab here and hearing this, hearing their own history spoke back to them and saying how that caused my belief. Man, think about them. Like, it wasn't meaningless that my parents died in the wilderness, that they struggled. It wasn't meaningless that they had to go the long way and then we had to go through all the things that we went through over the last 40 years. Right? Because now I'm being saved. We might not have defeated Jericho. Right? I might have died. But because of all this stuff, this woman believes us and she's hiding us. She's fighting for us. Right? So even for them, not just Rahab, for these spies, wow, because of all the things that God has done for us, we're going to be spared today. And then we also see, so that's the miraculous provision and how God works on their behalf. But we also see personal victory. So this is the story of Sihon and Og. So in Numbers 21, I'm not going to read the whole text for you, but I just want to explain. So it's like, who's the Sihon and Og? Right? Just a little bit of this history that's going on here. 21 through the beginning of 22 is the story of Israel coming up against them. So what happened here is Israel sent messengers to say to King Sihon of the Amorites, let us travel through your land. We won't go into the fields or vineyards. We won't drink any well water. We will travel the king's highway until we have traveled through your territory. So they're just asking permission. Hey, we've been traveling here. We're on our way there. We're not going to come in and take anything from you. We don't want anything from you. Just allow us to travel through your property. Right? And the king says, no. In fact, but Sihon would not let Israel travel through his territory. Instead, he gathered his whole army and went down to confront Israel in the wilderness. He goes to war with them. They ask, hey, please, sir, could we come through your property? And he's like, forget you, let's go to war. We're going to kill you. Right? And again, there's purpose in this. Right? So first of all, God leads them and they have victory. They beat these guys. Right? And where they were just asking for permission, that can we just walk through? Because they come and go to war with them, they actually take over all of his land. Right? He is totally destroyed because he is not gracious. His heart is hard, right? And he tries to go to war with them. And so Israel is blessed because of having to go through this. And, again, this serves as evidence later. They see that, man, not only did God do miraculous things for these people, but, man, they went to battle against this guy, and they won. And they were victorious, right? And so he's like, there's something to be messed with too, right? And it's the same thing with Og. Again, they go to war with this other guy as well, and they take him out, right? They weren't seeking to go to war with these guys. Those guys were hard and were not loving towards them and tried to go to war to them. And so these struggles that they come into interact with serve as evidence later. There's good in it. So it's like those struggles that you go through, you don't know, man, what your faithfulness will produce. So some things, like in my life, when Karis was born, she was basically dead, right? She came out of the womb, and she was blue and floppy, and they laid her on the table, and I was like, okay, I think she's dead. And the doctor's like, you know what, the chance of her coming back, they take her out to the NICU, and she's not breathing for 20 minutes. They finally got her to breathe, and they're just like, it's not looking good. Be ready for her to be brain dead. Be ready for her to probably be a vegetable. She's probably going to have all kinds of problems. We're going to have to bring all these specialists in and look at her. Within 10 days, miraculously, Karis goes out a perfectly healthy, happy baby. Doesn't need anything. In fact, she's taller than most kids in her grade, reads the most out of all the kids in her grade. She's not just surviving, she is thriving. That is miraculous. That's nothing that we did, right? That is something miraculous that God did on our behalf. And that speaks a testament to who God is and his power, right? That's amazing. Then there's other things where we are more involved, right? There's miraculous things God does for us, and then there's miraculous things God does through us, and empowering us to be faithful, right? And being faithful through hard situations. So then people can see that, wow, they did this and this, and that's evidence to them, right? So you struggling, but still pursuing God, even though you're struggling, and you spending time reading your Bible, you spending time praying to God, you actively living out your faith by serving people around you, having conversations about God with friends and neighbors and stuff, right? You doing things as well, God uses that as evidence of him to others. Right? People see how you struggle, and they see how you continue going, and they're like, there's something different about this person. Man, their faith is real. I see how God got them through that situation. I saw how they were victorious. Maybe they're victorious in battle, right? Or maybe they're victorious spiritually on the inside. Where it's like, man, I saw they struggled, and maybe this person had a drinking problem. Maybe they had a lust problem. Maybe they had a whatever problem. But man, their faith allowed them to get through that and be victorious. They overcame that. And it's a result of their relationship to God. It's not just that they modified their behavior, right? And that speaks about God and gives evidence as God is as well, right? These guys, they came up against this king, and they could have just been like, ooh, he wants to go to battle with us. Let's turn and run. No, God's like, hey, I'm going to hand him over to you. But they had to obey, and they had to go into battle, right? And then God delivered them, and they won. And so for us there, it's just, man, how we live matters. Right? God will at times miraculously deliver you from things, and at other times, he will enable you miraculously to struggle through some really hard times and keep fighting. And that's going to be for your good and for the good of others around you as well. That might even be that, maybe your grandchildren look back and they hear stories of things you went through, and they're like, wow, their faith was real. I want that. Right? Maybe they see the way you lived and died, and they're like, wow, you don't know what miraculous thing God will do just by your persevering. And so we see that God sent them through specific trials that he prepared for them, and they were also involved, right? Both their victories and their defeat revealed God's glory. So with this whole battle with Sihon and Og, this happens after the first time that they were going to go into the promised land. Right? They had got to the River Jordan. Moses sent 12 spies in. They go in and like, wow, this land is great. It's got good food. Right? It'll provide for us. But there's these giants and there's these cities that are fortified. I don't know. I don't know that God can get us through this. I mean, he divided an ocean for us that we could walk through on, but I don't know if we can beat these guys. Right? And so the result of them not believing was that they had to spend more time in the wilderness. And all those people had to die before they could be allowed to go in. Right? But what happens after that is then they have this victory. So if they had just, again, easy way, all right, we go in, we obey, right? Then all these other stories wouldn't have happened. This victory against Sihon and Og wouldn't have happened. Not to say that we should purposely go and sin so that God could then free us from it later, right? But it's to say that God never loses, right? The mistakes of your past might still be used for good, right? Everything ends up leading to God's eventual glory, right? Whether it's on purpose or it's something that we did wrong, God can still use that. But that doesn't mean that we go and like, hey, this might lead to God's glory. I'm just going to have fun and enjoy this. Right? No, God calls us to obey. God calls us to faithfulness, right? But we should never despair or live in shame that like, oh man, now God can't use me because I messed up. He can still use you. Shoot, look at Rahab. She was a prostitute, right? She was not an upstanding citizen of Jericho. And God chose her and used her. Now, after forming a relationship with God, she wasn't a prostitute anymore. She gave that up, and she got married to one man, and then became the great-great-grandmother of Jesus, right? So your past doesn't determine your future, and your past has a purpose. We talked about this over Easter, how the fact that, even Jesus, after he was crucified, he still had scars, right? And so his scars even served a purpose, that people could see that, like, oh, you're him. You're not just someone who looks like him. Like, I can see the scars from where you were crucified for us, from the struggle that you went through on our behalf. And so then that revealed to the people that he appeared to that, like, he was the Messiah. So even his scars had a purpose, right? With this healing a new body, why have scars? Right? Even that had a purpose. And so ultimately what this all led to was God's glory. Right? That she could know that Yahweh was the one true God. She could know that this is the way to salvation. I want to belong to him. And if I obey him, if I align myself with him, with this nation, I'll receive salvation. This is the way to go. Right? It's not a way, it's the way. And for her, man, it resulted in, man, I need to give this up, run from this, and run to him. And I need to live differently now. And it's not going to be immediate, right? It's going to take some time. It's going to be a journey. But she didn't just get to go in and camp with the Israelites right away. She's on the outside for a time. There's a process to become an Israelite. They had to become a proselyte. So they had to go through, first of all, they had to get to know them and stuff, right? But then they had to go through this ritual cleansing and everything, and then they could be invited into the community. Sacrifices had to be made, right? And then she doesn't just get to be part of the community. She then gets to be married and be part of the lineage of Christ. But it's a process. It didn't happen right that moment. Shoot, their victory over Jericho didn't happen in that moment. It's at least weeks after this whole incident that something happens. Right? And days of watching them march around the city and nothing happening. But all this results in God's glory. Even this city being destroyed resulted in God's glory. They could see that Yahweh is powerful. They blew some trumpets and the walls fell down. That's miraculous. Right? And so what's the application for us? This is not just a story of something that God did back then. Right? This is biblical narrative with a bias. That God also wants to teach us something. He wants us to remember, right, what he did and learn from it. Right? We too are going to go through struggles, but there's purpose in it. Right? We too can look back like Rahab and see this as evidence of man, this is evidence of the power of God, that God can do miraculous things for me and through me. Right? And that I too, like Rahab, need to abandon my life and my allegiances here and give them over to God here. I need to change. Right? And I need to act on it. So if I just sit on this knowledge and faith, nothing's going to happen around me. But if I act on it, what miraculous things could God do? Right? With a small group of us, man, if each one of us were on fire for God, really living for God, what amazing things could he do in our community with a small group of people? So in Romans 12, 1 and 2, it says to offer up your lives now as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. Right? And so it's, man, these guys, not just the sacrifices that they're burning and offering, their lives were sacrifices. Right? Their lives proclaimed the glory of God. And so he's calling us to do the same thing. And we don't, in our place of redemptive history, we don't have to go through the sacrificial system and everything, but our lives are a sacrifice. Our lives are to proclaim God's glory. So how we live out this life matters. Right? We talked last week about how, Ephesus, when they responded, it was real and it was epic and it cost them something and there was drastic change. They threw out their books of magic. They threw out their idols. Right? And even in their community, it cost their community something. Right? Because now we can't sell magic books to these guys. Now we can't sell idols to these guys. What if everyone becomes a Christian? Crap. I'm not going to have a job anymore as an idol maker or as a spell book writer. Right? And then God in Revelation says, man, he calls them back to that first love. He's like, man, when your church first heard the gospel, those people, they responded in a way that they truly loved me. It wasn't just about doctrine. It wasn't just about right practice and head knowledge. It changed who they were. Right? So for us, man, if we really respond, if we walk through the Red Seas, right? If we throw off our allegiances and do something different. If this is not just Sunday night worship, and then Monday, back to school, back to whatever, I'll check God out again next Sunday evening, right? If this changes all of our life, man, God could do miraculous things in the lives of the people around us, right? He could free you from things that you're enslaved to. You're going to have to fight with it, right? You're going to have to struggle. You're going to have to do things that are hard, and it feels like nothing's changing, nothing's happening. I don't even know if I'm really going to be freed from this. But he's going to be there. And by you struggling, he can do things for other people. They can see that. That can be evidence for them. Right? We talk a lot about Galatians 5, both 16 and 25, where it talks about us walking with the Spirit. Right? Man, Israel literally was walking with the cloud of God guiding them and doing miraculous things for them. Now we have the Spirit of God inside of us. We need to keep in step with him. Right? And by keeping in step with him, we're not doing the works of the flesh. Right? We're no longer doing these evil things that hurt our relationship with God, that hurt our intimacy with God, and are a way of using God's name in vain. Right? We often think, and I've said it before, we often think about using God's name being like, I stubbed my toe and, oh God, that hurt. Right? No, using God's name in vain is saying I'm a Christian when I'm living just like everybody else. When I'm living in opposition to God while I'm claiming his name. So that would be evidence to people of hypocrisy. Right? And that would be evidence of Christianity didn't change them, so I don't really need it. I can see through that. That's crap. Right? On the other hand, if we walk with the Spirit, he's going to enable us to be loving towards others, even when they don't deserve it. He's going to enable us to persevere, to be faithful. He's going to do miraculous things in our life. He's going to heal people and bring them back, right? He's going to change who you are and how you interact with people. He's going to enable you to forgive people that other people are like, how did you forgive that person? Why did you fight to continue to love on that person? It would be so much easier just to cast them aside. So, man, let's let our lives be a living sacrifice. Let's not just play church, right? Let's be church. Let's be God's people. Let's make a difference. So let me pray for us. Lord, thank you for loving us. Thank you for our pasts. Thank you for the struggles that we've gone through, Father, and that they're not meaningless. And I thank you for the people who've struggled before us and persevered through that struggle, and that we can look to their lives as evidence, Father. And so I just pray that you would help us to just be awakened, to really live out our faith, Father, to take this seriously, and to just struggle the hard road, Lord, that we don't want to. I pray that you be with us as we sing the rest of tonight, and just that like that last song said, that as we sing, we'd be reminding our souls, Lord, of our love for you, of the things that you've done for us. I pray for revival in each of our hearts, Lord, in the community around us, whether it be co-workers, fellow students, neighbors. I just pray that you would use us, Lord, to serve others and to love you well. In your name, Lord Jesus, amen.